Einer meiner Lieblingsmusiker ist im Interview bei mir. Es ist Mike Keneally. Viele von euch kennen ihn vielleicht nicht, einige doch, aber nach diesem Interview werdet ihr ihn sehr viel besser kennenlernen. Mike, thanks so much for granting us this interview. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm doing very, very well today. Got a day off on a Devin Townsend tour, so we're having a day off in Tilburg right now, and yeah, feeling good.
Yeah, so do I, because I am privileged to have another interview with you. And we have a reason. We have a new record out. But before we get to that, there are a few things that I need to ask you. You were born in Long Island, but you moved to California at a very young age. Now,
Mhm.
when was that? And how did the Californian scene influence your music? Because the NYC scene is so much harder and completely different than the Californian scene, isn't it?
Well, I was very young when we made the move. I was born in 1961 and we moved in mid 1970, so I was only 8. So I didn't have that much. I'd have to say that the music scene in New York and California didn't impact me directly so much because I was so young. I wasn't going to shows. So the popular culture was all getting to me refracted through television and radio and whatever was being released on record. And I would say at that age, I was more focused on what was coming out of England because I was so obsessed with the Beatles from a very early age. So I'd have to say the move, there were certainly cultural shifts and adjustments that I had to make to go from New York to California, mainly to do with schooling. But in terms of popular culture, it was pretty much just my Beatles obsession continued uninterrupted.
So you already mentioned one band, the Beatles, but tell us about your musical heroes then and
Um,
now.
yeah, well, I mean, the Beatles were the first, but then when I was 7 years old, I started playing the organ, and my experience with organ music was all very much related to American pop music standards from like the 30s and 40s. That was my grounding. But then when we moved to San Diego, I got an FM radio, and I got my first taste of what alternative radio was like in the early 70s. And there was a lot of progressive rock. I remember hearing King Crimson's Islands of the day that was released. They played the whole record, and the same with Tarkus. And that was a huge. My first major keyboard influence was Keith Emerson, because I was playing the organ already for a couple of years, but I just didn't know that you could do anything like that on an organ. It was a whole other planet of sound. And so I became obsessed with Emerson, Lake and Palmer at an early age. Of course, Frank, I became obsessed with Frank at age 9. And I just through the radio, I started hearing things like Thick as a Brick, and I became fascinated with Jethro Tull. And Roundabout by Yes was an AM radio hit in its edited form, and I became really, really interested in Yes. And so early on, I got an interest in progressive rock and experimental rock, and Frank was just so delightful to me. I just didn't think that you were allowed to do things like that. So from being primarily a pop music fan via the Beatles and AM radio, thanks to FM radio, I became more into experimental and progressive rock. I also got very into the Rolling Stones. And I remember thinking at the time that you weren't allowed to like both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones at the same time. So I remember making the decision to become a Rolling Stones fan as opposed to a Beatles fan. And then I got a little bit older and I realized that no, you're allowed to like whatever you want.
We're both progressive rock fans. What was the first progressive rock record you had?
It may well have been Tarkus, but I remember getting Tarkus around, close to its release date. So shortly thereafter is when I got Thick as a Brick. And then it was at that point that was, the momentum was going, and I in fairly quick succession I got Close to the Edge and The Power and the Glory, and and I was also continuing to collect Zappa records, and I remember hearing Uncle Meat, and on first listen thinking, I just can't make sense of this, and this feels like something that's above my pay grade or more grown up than I'm ready for right now. but I just kept listening because it fascinated me so much, and gradually I developed a taste for that. And I think Uncle Meat is what led me into Henry Cow and the Residents, and gaining a greater appreciation for Beefheart. So at that point I was, I've always all the way along the line just liked stuff that was quality in one way or another. So I can love the Beatles and Steely Dan and very slick, very very precise pop music, and then on the other hand I can get into very noisy, very discordant stuff like the Residents and the Beefheart, or the more improvisational things of Henry Cow and Art Bears, and all of it just feels beautiful to me.
Now, we talked about you playing the organ, but of course we know you mostly as a guitar player today. I know that your brother, Marty, also plays guitar. Did you come from a musical household?
Not in terms of anybody else actually playing instruments, but my father was musical in nature, in that he was always singing around the house, and he had a beautiful singing voice. And he was especially adept at whistling, and he could do like very intricate melodies whistled. And we also just listened to music. There were always records playing on the stereo in the living room. So I associate my childhood with music, even though my parents weren't musicians as such. But they were very supportive of me, and they actually, I think, sensed something in me before I did, because they got me an organ for my 7th birthday, and I hadn't specifically asked for an organ or for any instrument. I didn't necessarily know at that point that I knew I loved music, but I didn't know that I had a destiny to play it. But as soon as I saw that keyboard, I knew that I was supposed to start playing it right away, because it made sense to me. And I remember approaching the keyboard and playing melodies on it right away, just because the way a keyboard is laid out, I could see the music there.
Well, we're about the same age, so I'm wondering, what kind of music did your parents listen to?
Oh, Ray Conniff and the Mills Brothers, and a very easy listening of the 60s.
Herb Alpert?
Herb Alpert, definitely. That was definitely in the mix. And there were like Percy Faith, and there were a couple of, for some reason, Jackie Gleason, who's an American TV comedian, managed to get his name stuck on some records as a conductor or a muse or something. But it was Jackie Gleason presents blah, and so it's always very symphonic, very romantic, and some would say syrupy. But what caught my ear about all that stuff was how dense the harmonic content was, which is the same with my organ lessons. I was playing what some people would think of as quite schmaltzy standards, pop music classics from the 30s and 40s. But all these fucking chords had like 7, 8 notes, and so they're very dense harmonically, and the way the chords lead from one cadence to another is very artful. Because back in the 30s and 40s, people were really serious about songwriting. If these people who were writing popular music were incredibly educated musically and able to do really quite remarkable things harmonically, and that was my grounding as in terms of my organ lessons when I was a kid.
Yeah, but I think these easy listening people, I mean, they are great musicians, they are great conductors, great arrangers, and they played even rock music. They played in a subtle way. I remember being influenced very much by the German big band leader James Last,
who
did exactly the same thing. And his
Yeah.
music brought me to rock music eventually.
Oh, because he was covering a lot of that music, and you
Yeah.
would hear his versions and want to hear the originals. Yeah, James Last made an impact in the United States as well. There was, so many. It's interesting. That was a corner of the music market. There's really no modern equivalent to that, but that was a huge part of people's listening back then.
You already mentioned Frank Zappa. Some people might not know that you actually played with Frank Zappa. Tell us a little bit about your time with him.
Well, in some ways it was almost disorienting, because I grew up idolizing Frank. From the point that I first heard his music, he assumed a position of importance in my life above, basically all other musicians. So for that to be the beginning of my professional career, which it was, because his was the first band that I played in before I had any other professional music gigs. was a kind of a mind-blowing thing for me, because that was my dream growing up. So my dream came true at the beginning of my career, which is almost unsettling, because at that point, once that band was done, you think, what do I do next? Because nothing else could ever match that experience of playing for, hero is a loaded word, but he really was like such an important figure to me growing up. And then to be in his band and to personally witness the way he led the band, the way he led rehearsals, the way he put new music together using the band essentially as manuscript paper, because he would say, I've got a new song. He'd show up at rehearsal with the lyric sheet for Jesus Thinks You're a Jerk, and not one note of it demoed out, nothing on paper, nothing on tape. It was just a sheet of lyrics. And then just through verbal commands and his force of will, managed to get an entire 12-piece band to put together an arrangement for this, reasonably complex 9-minute piece of music, over the course of a couple of days. And then, it was fascinating and inspiring to see the way he would lead a band and make music happen. And I would say, in terms of influence on me, it's his band leading capabilities that most got to me. And as I started, doing more of my own with my own bands, I think that was like a big had a big impact on me. And certainly musically, Frank had a big impact on me, which is something that I have to contend with every time I write a song. Practically, it's like trying to make sure it doesn't sound too much like Frank, because his influence on me was so strong, So sometimes you have to just like consciously steer away from that, and then sometimes you have to embrace it, and just say, damn it, this will sound better played on a marimba, and I don't care what anybody says about it. I want to hear this played on a marimba. And so sometimes his orchestrational thing, he made those choices for specific reasons. Some melodies just sound amazing when they're articulated on a marimba, because it's so sharp and it's so articulate. He got that stuff right. And sometimes you just have to call on that. There's no shame in that, because Frank called on his heroes as well. You can hear Varese in his stuff. You can hear Stravinsky in his stuff and all that.
You mentioned the word, or you spoke the word unsettling a few times in connection with Frank Zappa. Now, everybody knows that Frank Zappa was not necessarily an easy guy to get along with. At least that's what most people say. Did he unsettle you or rattle you personally as well?
No, the only thing that was unsettling was just starting a career in this exalted position. There were times I just couldn't believe that I was actually there. In terms of the personal relationship with Frank, I felt that what he was asking of us in the band was reasonable. He was paying us to play his music accurately. It's a pretty simple equation. And I always and I had a vested interest in playing his music well anyway, because I loved his music. I loved him. I wanted to please him. I was young and had just come into the band, so I was into that trying to impress stage. And I didn't have any issues with just the concept of I'm paying you to play my music properly. That should be fine, right? We should all agree that makes sense. And I wanted to play his music well, just because it sounded so good when it was played properly. So I didn't understand anybody who bridled at the idea of Frank using various means of discipline in order to get the music played properly. That was the gig. And he was very clear in that he did consider, he was paying us to play the music. So in that sense, he was our boss. But in a larger sense, the audience is his boss. People come to the show expecting the music to be played well, and he took that responsibility very seriously. So he didn't like the idea of anybody in the band letting the audience down, letting him down, and I'd say above all, letting the music down. We're all there. He's gone to a lot of trouble and expense to fly all of us to this city to play the music well. Let's not fuck it up, right? We all agree. So I understood his reasoning on that front.
Well, had you fucked up, he would have probably let you go in a flash, I suppose.
Well, I mean, in some ways, his hands are tied, because if you're in the middle of a tour and you've got a guy in the band who's not cutting it musically, if you make the decision to fire him, you have to make choices right away. Is there any, are we just going to do without whatever orchestrational benefit that member was providing? Is that just done now? Or do we replace him? In which case we have to find somebody who's like ready to plug themselves into this very demanding position in a band. And there might not be manuscripts ready to go. A lot of this music just comes together through osmosis practically. So anybody who comes into the band new, there's a lot that he needs to learn quickly. So I would say that there are times that people stayed in the band just because Frank had no other option but to let them stay in the band, whether they were really doing a good job musically or not.
Now, you played his music, but you also played your music to him, because Hat, your first solo album from 1992, was released while he was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
What did he say about it?
Well, he was extraordinarily complimentary, which blew my mind at the time. And if somebody had come to me at that point and said, "Okay, you have to stop doing anything now," I would have said, "All right, that's fine. I'll just sit over here in the corner for the rest of time," because to have Frank say to me that well, basically I gave him a copy of the album, and then the next time I went over to visit at the house, there was a guy named Dave Dondorf, who was one of Frank's technical crew. And he met me at the door. And the first thing he said was, "Wow, Frank really likes your album." And I was not expecting to hear that. And then, you descend into the inner sanctum and you find your way to the basement, where Frank is sitting in a chair talking to somebody on the couch. I can't remember who he was talking to, but I do know that when he looked up and saw me, that he politely put a pause in the conversation he was happening so that he could turn to me and say, "Your album is great." And I was, what do you say? That's all I ever wanted. At age 20, 21 or 20, I know I was probably 28 at the time, or older. To have him say that was everything I could hope for. So I don't remember anything that happened from that point forward practically for the rest of the night. It just turned into a kaleidoscopic tapestry.
Were you afraid he might dismiss it? And what would have happened had he done it?
Oh, if he had listened to the album and not liked it?
Yeah.
I would have gotten over it, and I don't expect it would have affected his opinion of me any, as long as I could continue doing the job. But I guess I didn't even consider that possibility, because I had a pretty high opinion of the album and thought that at least he would find it interesting. I didn't expect that he would look me in the eye and tell me that it was great. That was not what the reaction that I had anticipated. But I figured at least he would see something of value in it. So I feel confident that I wasn't wasting his time by handing it to him, because I worked very hard on it. And I thought that he would understand what had gone into the construction of this thing. And it turned out that he actually really did appreciate, the effort that had gone into it. And it still kind of blows me away that any of this happened at all. It's surprising to me to this day that Frank even heard my music, much less liked it. The whole sequence of events still takes me by surprise.
You will be the eternal Frank Zappa fanboy, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I think is great.
It doesn't matter whether I play with him or not. Yeah, I think that's true. I just appreciate his work so much.
Before we get into your music, one more question about the Zappas. You also played with Dweezil and Ahmed Zappa in Z.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you live actually in the early 90s when you played Munich, and you played the medleys. How much of a nightmare was putting those medleys together and rehearsing them and getting them right? Because you had 15 minutes, about 597 songs or something.
Well, I can tell you, it wasn't more than 200 songs, because we made a pact at one point that if anybody wanted to suggest adding a new song to the medley once we had hit 200, we had to take something else out. So we made a decision to max it out at 200, but it was still a half hour or more of music. And basically it was a medley that consisted of songs from the probably when you saw it, it was songs from the 70s. Because that on various tours we adjusted it to different themes, but for the majority of the time that we were doing that medley, it was 200 songs from the 70s, and it lasted in the neighborhood of a half hour. It could last longer because sometimes Amit would get into very improvisational riffs, and he might start talking about anything, and you'd have to just wait until it was time he had finished, and you move on to the next cue, whatever it is. But we just knew from doing shorter versions of it. We had done like 10-minute versions of it, 15-minute versions of it at gigs in Los Angeles, and we could see that people were profoundly affected by it. Because we weren't just doing like, say, 2 or 3 lines from a song. It was 200 songs from the 70s. Some songs we would play long enough for you to really register what the song was, but then some of the songs we would play so little of, just like a fragment of it, a microscopic fragment, and all the segues from song to song were pivoting on one note or one word. So if that note could come in the weirdest spot metrically in whatever the riff is that you're playing, it could be the 3E of the second bar, but if it's the right note that pivots into the same note in a whole other riff from a whole other song in a complete different tempo and different time signature and key, that's fine. We're just pivoting from that note, from this riff to this completely different riff. And obviously that stuff requires a huge amount of rehearsal to get correct. But that band, all we did was rehearse. For every gig that Z played, we probably rehearsed for 6 weeks. If you average out mathematically the time spent rehearsing versus the time spent gigging, there were some years that we went out and played for like 3 weeks and spent the rest of the time rehearsing. We were definitely dedicated to getting this stuff right. I think that band, which was not represented in such a way on record that you could listen to the Z albums and really get a feel for what that band was. The records are fine. The live experience with that band was mind-blowing. It's one of the best live bands ever, I think. Regardless of whether I was in the band or not. I think those early Dweezil and Amit tours, we did some shows that left people, scarred for life. It's just so crazy to see that medley stuff happening. Plus, Dweezil had written this long instrumental called Purple Guitar, which I think eventually got released in some version, but to really get the effect of Purple Guitar as a composition, you needed to witness it on stage. It was just a cool band. It was a really powerful band, crazy stuff.
And who did the arrangements? And I come back to that. Was it a nightmare to do, or was it fun to do?
It was fun to do because you knew that once it was learned that it would blow people's minds, and that was the whole goal. Was just to leave people absolutely astonished. So we enjoyed that aspect of it, and we knew that the time spent preparing the stuff to learn it was going to pay off in terms of people's response to it. And I would say the arrangements were really a group collaboration. Everybody in the band had a voice in terms of how to make these segues from song to song work, or which songs to include. It was entirely an equal collaboration in that regard.
You say that the medleys affected people. The show that I was at, 2 people actually stormed towards the stage when you did the Queen thingies. I think it was Another One Bites the Dust and We Will Rock You or something. And and they actually wanted to beat up Dweezil, Amit and Dweezil actually. And Amit was like, "Oh yeah, come on, guys," because they were like, "You can't do that can't do that to Queen. What do you think you're doing?"
Oh, really? Like Queen is somehow such sacred territory that we couldn't. Yep. That's funny. That's just funny. Well, the mindsets like that need to be punctured every once in a while.
Now I have to ask you this. We've already talked about a few musicians, but there are so many more. Not just your scope of music is incredibly large, but also the array of musicians you've played with. How did that network come about? I mean, you're friends with Steve Vai, with Joe Satriani, with Devin Townsend, like big names, loads of people. How the hell did that happen?
I think it's starting by playing with Frank. That was for whatever reason, that's the sequence that the events in my life assumed. So the fact that was like at the very beginning of my career put me in a pretty good place for like at least being able to demonstrate to others that I was I was not a waste of time. But the fact that it went directly from Frank to I played with Weasel and Ahmet for like 5 years after I played with Frank, and then from there to Steve. The beginning of my career was all very much in this Zappa orbit. Obviously Steve knew of me through knowing Frank. So up until the point that I stopped playing with Steve, which was 2001, I guess. I'd say that it's primarily the Zappa angle that is the reason why anybody paid attention to me, if that answers that question. But
Absolutely does,
because in terms of like piecing together a network of people in the industry, it's all just about starting somewhere and then building from there.
So let's get to your discography. Actually, by the way, I totally understand what you just said, because if there are two musicians or groups in the history of rock music that people say, if you've played with them, you're good, then that's Frank Zappa and Steely Dan.
Yeah, okay. I think back when Miles Davis was alive, he was another one.
Yes,
But
that's
yeah,
true.
yeah. But okay, yeah, and it's funny because in terms of Frank, there are some people for whom that's the highest accolade, and then there's other people for whom it's like run away as fast as you can. But in terms of the people that I wanted to work with, and the people that it made sense for me to work with, having played with Frank was, it might have been an impediment to a certain kind of commercial success, but I wasn't really going for that anyway. I was looking for people to play with who felt the same way that I did about music, and having come up through Zappa was a very good way to meet people like that.
Now, one question on your extensive discography. You've played so many different styles. I already said that, and put them out on records. How did or do you decide what kind of music you play on any given record? Whether it's like a little, like the Wooden Smoke, for example, acoustic stuff, whether it's really wild progressive, whether it's metally, hard rock. How do you decide?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know necessarily that there have been. Well, I would say that every album is its own answer to that question. Because, for instance, the dancing album was defined by that particular group of musicians that I was playing with at the time, which is an 8-piece group with horns and percussion and a lot of additional instrumentation. And that band just playing live in the studio produced a certain kind of sound, and that's what defined the sound of that album. And then after that, I remember really wanting to have a very distinct shift of texture and of sound and orchestration, and the acoustic guitar was just really appealing to me at that point, and that's what resulted in Wooden Smoke, which was a significant shift from the sound of the dancing record. And these are all instinctive, reflexive choices that just feel right to me at the time. There were things that were happening in my life that really made me want to mellow out, to chill out, and that corresponded with the time that I was working on Wooden Smoke. And then, a couple of years after that, you get into a period where I have the opportunity to compose for orchestra, and then that's when the Universe Will Provide happens. That is like composition that is determined by circumstances pretty much beyond my control, because I wasn't seeking out orchestral commissions, but one, thanks to Code Clute on Dutch radio, who has, inspired and encouraged all kinds of creative activity for me through the years. He opened up this possibility for me to write for orchestra. And so that resulted in an album that wouldn't have come about otherwise.
We will, of course, be getting into that particular album when we talk about the individual songs on the new record. But let me say, The Universe Will Provide, to me, is one of the greatest pieces of work ever done in the field of rock or pop or progressive music, neoclassical, whatever. That is definitely a desert island disc. It's one of the greatest records ever done. So thank you. Still, thank you very much for that one.
That is amazing to me, Carsten. Thank you. I mean, when I think of that record, I'm very grateful on a number of fronts. And because it was the first time I attempted to write for orchestra, I feel like it's still like I'm still waiting for the next opportunity to write for orchestra, because I can hear so many ways in which I would try to develop things beyond what are on that record. But I still think it's a fine album, and I'm grateful that you like it so much.
Well, I hadn't planned on dwelling on that too much, but I have to ask you, you played with the Metropole Orchestra. And of course, that Dutch orchestra is like one of the most ingenious orchestras around, I think, and they are open to anything. Couldn't you just go to them? Couldn't you just write something and go to them and say, well, guys, when you have time, would you mind doing another one?
No, I couldn't. These things, because it's such a it's a very renowned body of musicians that comes with a whole process that's required to get them to play your music. So I imagine there's a pretty significant waiting list of composers who would like to have something new recorded with the Metropole, and there's a huge amount of expense involved, and there's no such thing as an orchestra that wants to work for free. So it really is budget dependent. And I could sit on my own and write music for orchestra, to my heart's content, but getting it actually rehearsed and played in real time by humans is a whole other thing, which is why I'm very grateful to Coda Clute, who's the reason why I was able to do Universe Will Provide, and then a few years later do these other recordings, including the one which is on the new album.
Now, that brings us to your brand new record, The Thing That Knowledge Can't Eat. I have to go into the timeline first. Since 1992, you've released records on a more or less regular time schedule. It wasn't all that, the intervals weren't all that long. But now, Scambot 2 and Inkling were the last albums before this one, 7 years ago. Why the long break?
It felt like a time to take a break. I view my career to date as a solo artist in roughly 3 sections. Then the third one is just now beginning, because the first one I consider as having started. Then this is not even thinking about the years and years of research work that I did prior to Hat, but in terms of stuff that people know about, that started with Hat in '92 and pretty much went up until 2004, which is when Dog and Universe Will Provide and the Vai piano reductions all came out, roughly around the same time. And I consider that, and then the live album, Guitar Therapy, to me, that caps off that first period that started with Hat. And then there actually were a few years, not as long as the break I just took, but there were a few years between Guitar Therapy. We put out a couple of reissues in 2006. And then finally, at the end of that decade, the aughts, I came out with Wine and Pickles as a kind of a catch-all place for leftover stuff from the previous era. And then I came out with Scambot 1 in 2009, and I think of that as kicking off the second era. And that consisted of Scambot 1 and the record I did with Marco Miniman, Evidence of Humanity, the record I did with Andy Partridge, Wingbeat, fantastic. You Must Be This Tall, which was an album that kind of grew out of Wingbeat, fantastic. All this stuff is kind of part of the Scambot era, because it's this overarching complex narrative piece that I recorded so much music for. So some of that music was on Scambot 1, some of it ended up on Wingbeat, some of it ended up on You Must Be This Tall. And then finally in 2006, I put out Scambot 2, which to me, that encapsulates that second era, which starting with Scambot 1, ending with Scambot 2. And now we're just starting the third era. And it was there's always a space in between these chunks of time where I feel like, all right, I've just put out so many records, and people, there are certain people that are into what I'm doing and they buy these records when I put them out, and I can just continue putting out new music to kind of service that audience. But the audience is not necessarily growing that immensely. So I get into a period of wanting to collaborate with other people and kind of introduce myself to some new audiences, get new experiences, and not just keep making albums after albums after albums. And after Scambot 2 and Inkling, I looked at my catalog to date, and it was a big stack of albums. And I thought, that's a lot for anyone to contend with. That's a lot of material for anybody to try to get their head around. And I know that there are people who are maybe interested in what I'm doing, but then there's the question of, where do I start? What is the first Keneally album that I should listen to? And every time I put out a new album, it just complicates that. So I thought, let's just let that stack of work stand on its own for a while, let some people discover me. In the meantime, I'll go out and work with some other artists, increase my my just range of experience. And then I was getting into the idea of putting out a new record and starting to get more enthusiastic about it after a few years away, and not even writing songs. I didn't write a song for about 3 years. And then right when I started thinking, yeah, I could put out an album, that's when the lockdown happened. That's when quarantine came into play. And at that point, I was stuck at home anyway, and it was the perfect time to start putting new music together. And that's when the new album happened.
And of course, You Must Be This Tall has Popes on it, which is one of the best songs you've ever done. And last time we talked, you said it was one of the damn most difficult songs to sing, because you had to get high and low and high and low and stuff.
Yeah, it's a weird melody. It's you have to be very committed.
I think the new record would actually be a very nice introduction into the different sides of Mike Keneally. Maybe not the most experimental sides, but I think it would be a nice introduction. But I have to say one thing. Is there pressure on you? The quality, and I'm not sucking up now, the quality of your records has always been extremely high. Everybody will say that. And you're certainly aware of that. Was there pressure on you that you had to reach that level of quality again, or can't you just write anything crappy?
I think I'm capable of writing crap, but I think that anything, even crap, can be treated lovingly to the point where it turns into something that's valuable. So, with every one of my records, with every song that's on each record, I'm always just chipping away at it, working on little orchestrational gambits, little mix moves, just things to take this weird musical impulse that I had and turn it into something that is actually palatable, that's actually enjoyable for people to listen to. And it's a lengthy process, but it's, by the time I get to a point where I can listen to a mix of one of these songs and say, yep, that's it, that's right, all the elements are in proportion, that's as good as I can get it, that song is ready for the world. At that point, I feel comfortable with putting it out in the world and letting people assess it. So it's not a thing about being nervous about matching up to my past work, because the standards remain the same and the procedure remains the same. I keep chipping away at it until finally I can listen to it and say, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm ready now to let it go. So the only question was whether in the intervening 7 years or however much it was, have my standards become so corroded, have I, or just like, is my mind completely skewed from the pandemic? Am I just like out of my mind? Because to me, this is a group of songs that met all of my quality control, the considerations. I checked every box. These songs are ready for you to listen to. So people's response to that is the only thing I can't control. I felt like I had done everything that I could on my end, and at that point, I was just sort of curious: how are people going to take to it? And so it's been very gratifying to find that people like it. You know, that I tend to find that people are enjoying the new record sonically as well, which is a great relief to me, because this is the first album where I worked on it so much on my own on a home rig as opposed to working with an engineer. So the learning curve was extremely steep. So I feel good that people enjoy the sound of the record also.
The thing that knowledge can't eat. What does the title mean?
There's a word in the last song on the record that I sing. You can just barely hear it. It's just like a background vocal texture, and the word is Yale Bangura. And I had seen that online a couple of years ago in the midst of pandemic, that it was something. I wish I could. I apologize for not remembering the name of the gentleman who wrote this, but he's from a people called the Dagara in West Africa, and in their language they don't have a word for supernatural, the idea of something that is beyond like human ability to comprehend or describe, or just if otherworldly type occurrences. In their language, they don't have a word for the supernatural, but the closest they get is a word Yale Bangura, which as precisely translated into English, it is the thing that knowledge can't eat, which basically just means, my wife had a nice insight when she said, "Oh, it just means you can't get your head around it." I was like, "Yes, that's exactly right." You can't literally, the knowledge contained in your skull cannot surround this concept. It's beyond our ability to, make logical human sense of. And to me, that describes a lot of life. It describes a lot of the more beautiful things of life. And it also describes a lot of music and the way music hits us and affects us emotionally, which can't be logically explained in many cases. So it's just a means of sort of hinting at the supernatural.
You say you made this album 42 minutes long, in the long-standing tradition of how albums used to be. And I've heard this being said by a lot of musicians lately. An album that's longer than, say, 34, some people say 34, 35 minutes, yours is 42 minutes long, is superfluous. Why the 42 minutes?
Well, that's just a nod to the length of vinyl albums when I was a kid. The idea of too much more than 20 minutes per side, two sides on a record, and you'd be getting into some issues sonically, although that was never a concern for Todd Rundgren. He'd put out 56-minute albums without blinking. But it's just, it does seem as though that's a quantity of music that is easily assimilable for a lot of people. And I have put out many lengthy albums, and I think I'm fortunate in that most of the people who like what I'm doing have strong lengthy attention spans, and they will hang out, they will listen to all of Civilization Phase 3 with headphones on and just like absorb every detail. So the people who are into what I do are like me, in that they will spend the time that is required to really analyze and immerse yourself in a piece of music. So an 80-minute album might not scare that many people that are inclined to like what I do. Nonetheless, I have found that the response to this album seems more immediate, more widespread, that I see more people talking about this record and liking it compared to my last few. And I think that the conciseness of it might have something to do with that. And it doesn't represent my absolute craziest stuff, my absolute weirdest stuff. And that's the next record. That's the album which is about 80% done right now, and which does have a lot of very crazy stuff on it.
Brilliant. Already looking forward to that one. Now, hang on. Isn't Todd in the Guinness Book of Records, or wasn't he in, with Initiation being, 60 minutes long? I think it was the longest rock and pop record ever done at that time.
I think it
as
might
a
have been.
single album.
Yeah, I think that's a 67-minute record. I think it's very, very long. And I never saw the Guinness Book listing, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's true.
Let's start with your Todd Rundgren song, Logos,
That's
because
interesting.
yes, because it's a theatrical piece. Now I'll give you my impression, and you can you
Okay.
can you can you can put me down for that.
No.
It's a theatrical piece, and it kind of reminds me of Todd stuff like Lord Chancellor's Nightmare song and stuff like
Okay.
that.
All right.
So tell us about that song. What are we hearing? What's it all about?
Um, that's an example of having written a set of lyrics a number of years ago. I don't even know what year I wrote them, and then on a small scrap of paper, and then putting them in an envelope with a bunch of my other lyrics, and then not looking at it for a few years. So I don't know why I wrote those lyrics. When I read them years later, I don't know what inspired it. I think it was just the sort of idea that arrives where you think a song about logos. Have I ever heard a song about logos? I think it's time to write a song about logos, and but without getting too specific about it, I wrote the lyrics in a kind of a sort of theatrical mannered way. And that happens a lot with things that I write, that I just adopt these sort of strange perspectives or attitudes from the point of view of the person who's singing the song. It's not necessarily me. It's just this character, and I don't even necessarily have a clear view of what the character is, but I can hear what they're saying, So it's I write a lot of music from a strange kind of perspective, a lot of lyrics that I don't necessarily understand, but to me it's just as valuable as any other perspective. So I'll go with it. So I wrote those lyrics and set them aside, and then years later, I was in Scott Chatfield's house, who runs my record label, XOX Recordings, and he had an upright piano in his dining room. It was just the right amount of out of tune. It had a very cool feel to it. I loved playing that piano. That's the same piano I played on Hallmark and a number of other songs through the years. So it was literally just sitting down going, I want to write something on this piano. It was just the desire to write a new piece of music on this particular instrument, and logos just tumbled out, right away. That first figure was the first thing that occurred to me to start playing. And then it's just a question of sitting there for an hour and letting one phrase suggest what the next phrase should be. And then it's stringing together phrases. And then it's, having Mike Harris, the engineer, put a couple of microphones on the piano, and away you go. And then I had this piano part written, and I didn't know what I was going to sing to it. I think I had a couple of ideas for possible lyric concepts, but I thought, well, I'll look through my big stack of unused lyrics, of which I do have a big stack from the years, and just look through them and see if I find something that feels to me like it goes with this piano composition. And I found those logos lyrics, and they required almost no revision. That's happened to me a couple of times where I got very lucky that I had a set of lyrics and then a separate set of music that were never meant to go together. And then I just say, well, what happens if I make them go together? And it's like they were meant for each other. And logos might be like the prime example of that happening for me. I got lucky there.
Now, Wooden Smoke isn't a logo, but it's one of the greatest designs I have on a T-shirt. So
Okay.
that's a maroon T-shirt with the Wooden Smoke on it. Bought it on your website, so there you go. Both sides of the street. Mr. Keneally in straightforward 70s rockin' mood, with vocals that actually remind me in a very good way of David Cassidy.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. When I hear those vocals, and when I was recording that vocal, I was more thinking of maybe Springsteen, or some midway point between Bruce Springsteen and Elvis Costello, because that song feels kind of like an Elvis Costello song to me, maybe a this year's model era. But I grew up watching the Partridge Family, and I really like the song "I Think I Love You." So
absolutely, isn't that one of the greatest songs ever?
It's a fantastic single. Yes, it truly is. Are you as fond as I am of the Cowsills version of Hair?
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic.
There's so much stuff. A lot of people describe it as cheesy, but it's not really cheesy at
It's
all. If you
truly
listen
not.
to it, it's just great.
I think
You
of
know,
cheesy. I think of cheesy as somebody that's not trying hard enough in terms of execution. And when you listen to Hair, there's so much like strong artistic effort that has gone into that record. It's a beautiful, beautiful little record.
absolutely. So,
Well,
anything else to add to Both Sides of the Street?
well, I dreamed of that song. That was a song that I actually had a dream that I was on the road crew for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. We had reached the end of a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young concert, and for some reason, everyone in the band was sitting on the stage, and I was a guitar tech, and I had a guitar in my hand, and I was standing. And for some reason, I turned towards the drummer and started playing that song, Both Sides of the Street, and I didn't know what the lyrics were. Like after I woke up, I had to just like devise a whole other set of lyrics, but I was singing that melody and playing those chords. And then, I finished the song. The audience like just lost their mind. The audience absolutely loved it. And the other weird aspect is that I played the song facing the drummer the entire time. I didn't look at the audience. I played through the whole song just looking straight at the drummer, and with all of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young sitting on the stage looking up at me. So I woke up in the middle of the night, still dark, and my wife was asleep beside me. And I said, I have to, it's a very simple chord progression, but I have to play it before I forget it. So I ran downstairs and I did a phone voice memo of me playing the guitar chords. And I think I probably sang the melody without lyrics just so I could remember the melody. And then I went back to sleep, and then later that day I put together the backing track that for the song that's on the record. And then once I finally had some lyrics written for it, which was just a story that I made up, I sent it around to some people because it was it's such a basic song. It's the type of thing where you think, well, surely somebody else has written this before. This chord progression or this melody, where have you heard this? And I sent it to a bunch of my friends and said, have you heard this song before? And a couple of people mentioned a Four Tops song that has a similar kind of surge in one section, but not enough to be concerned about in terms of copyright. So I felt like, okay, I guess I really did write this. And at that point, I felt okay with putting it on the record.
So when you went back to it after you had recorded it, had it still retained the same magic that it had in your dream?
No, that's impossible. I've tried that on numerous occasions and I've gotten close because I've had other songs that were dreams. There's a weird little thing on Sluggo called I Guess I'll Peanut. That was a dream. There's a song on Boil That Dust Back called Good Morning Sometime that I dreamed that entire thing. But the Both Sides of the Street, I actually had to write a B section because in the dream it was just the A section over and over and over again. And I recorded a version of it that way. And I said, this is, in a dreamland, the idea of just consistently grinding at these four chords over and over and over again, that can have a kind of magic. It can have a kind of an ineffable thing. But in the reality, especially nowadays where I'm about to sound like an old man. Modern pop songwriting is very often about a four chord sequence that just continues, and it's often the same exact four chord sequence that just continues looping, and that is considered songwriting nowadays. And I didn't necessarily want to contribute to that legacy, so I wrote a B section, and I stuck it in there a couple of sections, and that B section was not in the dream. So in that regard, it's not because I knew I wasn't going to be able to capture that feeling, which was in the dream of just facing the drummer and playing this four chord melody over and over and over again, and then having the audience lose their minds because it was so good. I think it's a good song, but I don't really see like vast quantities of people, losing control over it.
Oh, I love this song. It's a sort of straightforward song. And funnily enough, I thought of it today when I saw that Stephen Stills is going to put out a new record, Live in Berkeley, 1971.
Oh, that's cool.
So do some video magic and sit yourself on the stage.
I'll go sit on stage for his gig.
So, Mercury in second grade. Now, this reminds me, with the acoustic guitar, the overall sound of the vocals, very much of Latter-day Gentle Giant, circa The Missing Piece, Memories of Old Days, that kind of a deal. Tell us about that song.
Yeah, I guess I felt it more almost of a Jethro Tull type thing. You know, where the type of stuff where he's singing in a lower, meanwhile back in the year one, that
Yes.
kind of vibe, as opposed to the really, the minstrelly hen, so that's where I was coming from, the kind of a relaxed delivery vocally over a guitar thing, and it was a capoed part, so I kind of thought that was a little Ian Anderson-ish as well. But I do see the Gentle Giant parallel as well, and that one was written as an acoustic guitar piece. I didn't know what I was going to sing over it, and I think it was the same process as Logos, because I did both of those songs around the same time, where I had the music written just as a solo guitar composition, and then went through my backlog of unused lyrics to find something that might go with it. And I found this idea of Mercury in second grade, which I liked as a title and as a lyric concept. And I would say it was about half of what was in that lyric file that I found ended up in the final version. But I found lyrics from maybe 2 or 3 different songs that I thought belonged together, or that they felt like that they were elucidating the same concept. So I sort of Frankensteined that set of lyrics together from a number of unfinished, unused lyrics from the past many years. And then again, it's just a question of, can this work musically with this acoustic guitar piece that I have? And I found that if I engineered the melody in a very specific kind of sing-songy way, that I could make those lyrics go, with this kind of simplicity over this relatively complex rhythmically acoustic guitar part. I wanted the vocal to belie the fact that the acoustic guitar part is kind of tricky. I wanted it, because if you analyze any number of those Ian Anderson guitar parts from the 70s Tull, it's just spectacular, detailed, intricate little guitar pieces, and then the most poetic and amazing lyrical stuff going on top of it. That's very inspiring to me, the stuff that he did.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Jethro Tull, of course, I think of the mammoth thingies, but I also think of Dr. Bogan Broom, Nurse, Skating Away, stuff like that.
Or, Life is a Long Song is one of the most beautiful little songs ever.
Isn't that? It's such a great sing-along song.
It is.
Mike, how many inches of unused lyrics do you still have?
There's probably a stack somewhere along those lines.
Oh, you can get through those until the end of your musical career, I think.
Well, I mean, I'm glad they're there, because I tell you, writing lyrics is easily the hardest part of what I do when I'm making records. Coming up with musical ideas is kind of, I can't avoid them. My telephone is loaded with iPhone voice memos of the little musical fragments, any one of which I could turn into a song. So that's not an issue. But finding new topics to write songs about, lyrical things that I think are worth my time, much less anyone else's, that becomes more challenging just by virtue of the fact that I've written a lot of songs, I've written a lot of lyrics, and musically you can do variations on the same theme and continue to come up with rewarding results. But if you keep writing songs about the same lyrical theme, to me anyway, I would get restless. I would find it tiresome. So I'm always looking for new lyrical conceits, ideas, concepts that will excite me and make me want to write lyrics about it. And those just get smaller and smaller as time goes by, because I'm not like Frank, that I could just read the newspaper and become so incensed that I'll have something that I want to write a song about. I get too depressed. It's like when I read the news, I just go, oh, fuck that. It's like the last thing I want to do is spend my music time dealing with that topic.
Let's get to the veggie instrumental Celery.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds a bit like Frank Zappa to me in a way, but I know you have some great musicians on this song. Do tell.
Well, I have Nick DiVirgilio, spectacular drummer, is on there, and Pete Griffin, one of my favorite bass players, is on there. And also Steve Vai plays a couple of guitar solos on there. And that was a song that was written very quickly. I had been asked by Nick DiVirgilio, who works at Sweetwater in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's a large musical complex. They sell musical instruments online, but they also do performances and instrument demos, and they put out a lot of video content. And Nick does a lot of that stuff. And Nick was my drummer in the early 2000s, and he played on the Dog album. He's an incredible, wonderful musician, great player on a number of instruments. So he invited me to come to Sweetwater and do an engineering workshop, which was record two of my songs for a group of engineering students working with one of the recording engineers who was on staff at Sweetwater. And so he would record me and a band playing two new songs and explain to these students in the control room everything that he was doing about his process. And I was like, yes, I would love to do that and end up with like good, decent recordings of a couple of new songs. But I didn't have any songs around. So I quickly wrote Celery and Spigot, which is the next song on the record. Both of those songs were very quickly composed to meet the requirements of this engineering workshop. So I went to Indiana and recorded basic tracks for both of those with Nick and Pete Griffin on bass. And then I had the thumb drive with them, and I sort of lost track of where it was and didn't listen to it for a number of years. It was maybe 4 years before I got out that thumb drive and listened to those songs again. I knew I was working on a new record by that point, and I wanted to just gauge how much raw material did I have towards a new album. And I found those two songs, and I didn't know what to expect, but I ended up liking them a great deal. And part of what I liked about them was that they were written so quickly in order to meet the requirements of this workshop. I didn't have time to worry over every last detail of the song structure. It was a very second nature, instinctive songwriting, and there's real value in that. So I was grateful to listen to those, and then as I was working on Celery, I thought I have to call Steve. I can feel that there's something about this. There's something elemental in a rock guitar way about this song that requires a real guitar hero. Not my my sort of abstract paintings. So I wanted somebody who could really bring it home, and Steve is that. And he responded almost instantaneously with the two solos that he plays, and they really kicked the song up into another level. And I'm so grateful. I love the fact that he's on there.
Spigot, you mentioned it already. I know this is to do with Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts. And I have to say, the middle part, the jazzy piano solo and the whole vibe and sound has exactly the same sound as the incidental Peanuts music in the cartoons. I'm sure that's no coincidence.
Well, I can't say that was a conscious choice. No, honestly, I'm grateful that it hits you that way. And I actually I see your point, but I hadn't really thought about that. But I do think that you're absolutely right, and I think subconsciously I must have been aware of that on some level, because I do think that there is some of that flavor of those Vince Guaraldi soundtracks that are just so brilliant. I love that music so much. But I have a great respect for Charles Schulz, and I think that the Peanuts comic strip is one of mankind's great artistic achievements. And so it was very pleasurable for me to pay homage to him in the lyrics of that song.
Ack. Keneally goes big band. This is to me a typical Mike Keneally song, The Way That I Know Your Music. And of course, it's with the Dutch Metropole Orchestra. Now, tell us how that came about, where that song fits in, because you already started talking about it in a way earlier.
Yeah, this was a kind of a follow through, or the next natural progression after The Universe Will Provide, which is the piece I alluded to earlier, this 52-minute lengthy composition for guitar and orchestra. So that happened, and I recorded that in 2003. Then a few years later, Code Clute, the same Dutch radio producer and creative catalyst, suggested to me that I might want to work with a smaller group of musicians from the Metropole. And so he set it up so that I could get into a recording studio with it was 10 members of the Metropole Orchestra, my friend Brian Beller, who plays bass in my band Beer for Dolphins, and myself. And the only proviso, the only requirement, was that I couldn't have any prepared material prior to the session. I had to show up in the studio with a guitar and with this group of musicians and write something on the spot. So what I ended up writing was Ak and another piece called Chi, which that appears on the Scambot 1 album with the same instrumentation, basically a smallish jazz ensemble, concert jazz ensemble. So 11 players, including me. And so he just said, okay, write something. And the first song, Chi, you can actually find on YouTube some footage of me composing the song on the spot and showing it to the players in the room and putting an arrangement together. So we did that with the song Chi, and then the second song that I did using the same process was Ak. And Chi was released years ago, and for some reason I just never found a space for Ak until now, and this feels to me like finally the right spot. If this album were to be on vinyl, which I think it will be later in the year, Ak would be the first song on side 2. And it's such a strange little song that I am excited by the idea of it being the first song on side 2.
You are such a sucker for vinyl. But aren't we all? Lana, the most metal song on the album, but still has reminiscences of Gentle Giant to me. And I understand it was a pain in the ass to get it done. Why?
Well, the mix was primarily the most challenging thing about it. Because I knew there were a lot of vocals on there. There were a lot of guitar overdubs, and it was a song that I was working on by myself at home, dealing with the many minute parameters involved with recording and equalization and keeping very dense bits of sonic information out of each other's way, so that it turns into something pleasurable to listen to and not just a cluttered mess. So I was coming to terms with all of that, but at the same time I kept piling stuff onto this song just because I kept hearing it there. It needs this, it needs these extra vocals, it needs these additional 3 guitar overdubs, so I was putting this crazy toppling souffle together sonically, and it took a long time to get a mix on it that I was really satisfied with. But ultimately, I think I did a pretty good job. But it's still the most challenging song on the record. I think there's just so much information packed into such a relatively small space.
Right. Big hit song. It's quite a hymnal song, I think. Tell us a bit about the content and the title, because some people might say, "Oh, yeah, this is a big hit song." Really, Keneally thinks this is a big hit song.
Well, I mean, it's so obvious that Keneally doesn't have a big hit song that I would think that the irony in the title is self-explanatory. So I can't be concerned with that. And secondly, that's just what the song happened to be called, that I started writing in late 2018, which was the song that I broke my songwriting sabbatical with. I put out Scambot 2 and Inkling in 2016. And at that point, I just said, I'm not going to be thinking about making albums for a while. Because up until that point, I was always thinking I got to get the album done. It was like a big, word album written in neon letters in the back of my consciousness at all times. Once I finally finished Scambot 2, which was a very hard album to finish, I felt like it's time to take a break. It's time to take a rest from songwriting and album making. And that's when I did a bunch of collaborating with other people. But then, time led to me starting to get interested in writing again. And I remember sitting on my bedroom floor and the chord progression for Big Hit Song just coming out, the main part of it, which is relatively simple, deceptively weird, but it comes off as a relatively direct song. And just putting together the chord progression for the whole main section of the song sitting on the floor and feeling like as it was coming out, I think I'm writing songs again. I think I'm a songwriter again. It was a pleasure not to think about writing songs for a number of years, but then when Big Hit Song started to come out, I said, I think I'm going to get back to this. And then there was that weird middle section, which is meant to depict the Big Hit Song that's in Little Big Billy's mind, but is in fact the weirdest part of the song. That was something that I had written separately on keyboard, months before, and didn't know what I was going to do with. And once I saw where things were going with Big Hit Song and what the kind of narrative thrust of that song was, I thought it was funny and fun to have the actual depiction of Billy's Big Hit Song be such a weird kind of arcane, strange harmonic progression. But that was just my idea of something fun.
The carousel of progress. Now, as huge Gentle Giant fans, both of us, this must send shivers down our collective spine, because you have former Gentle Giant drummer Malcolm Mortimer on this thing. How the hell did you get him?
I was asked to participate in a Gentle Giant fan convention called Gorg.
I know the Gorg, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So that was, I think, 2018, maybe, that I was invited to perform at the New Mexico Gorg convention. And Malcolm was there, and Kerry was there, and Gary Green was there. So it was wonderful to hang out with them. And then they got a chance to watch me perform a solo set. That I've mostly played my own music, but I think I played Aspirations, and Andy West was on bass, and
Dixie Dregs
from the Dixie Dregs, and Anthony Garone, who does Make Weird Music online. He played guitar on a couple of things. So we had a nice little group there, and Anthony, with under the umbrella of Make Weird Music, did an interview with Malcolm and Kerry and Gary and myself. And I just my love for Gentle Giant is so strong, and my love and my affection and admiration for those guys is so profound that I was like really I felt very fortunate to be hanging out with them, and we even did some playing together and stuff, and it was just great. So I just maintained contact with Malcolm, and as I was in lockdown making songs, and it wasn't feasible to get together in physical space with a drummer to put drums on these things, I was farming out the songs to different drummers, and I really wanted Malcolm to play drums on Carousel of Progress, and he was very amenable and played beautifully, and came up with tracks for me very quickly. So it means so much to me to have Malcolm on my record. I think Three Friends is a profound record, and some of the best music. School Days is one of the most beautiful songs ever. So the fact that I have Malcolm on the record means a lot.
I have to ask, is there a possibility of you working with other former members of Gentle Giant somewhere in the future?
I would say anything's possible. Nothing's been discussed, and of course, I'm open. I'm available to have that conversation. It's always just about timing. to coin a phrase.
Yeah. Now I have to ask you this as well. You have been a recording artist for 30 years. You have a great reputation. You know so many people. Do you sometimes still feel a bit starstruck when you are in the company of people like the Gentle Giant members because you're such a big fan?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of wouldn't have it any other way. I think if I stopped feeling that way, it would mean that I was becoming less of a fan. And I really like loving music. And I understand that one should not idolize the people who record these things, especially since I don't really feel that that the musician is wholly responsible for the music they create. But I admire somebody who is in touch enough with the spirit of music to, like, grab hold of parts of the stream of music that flows and figure out how to present it so that we can hear it. I'm very grateful for that. That's a gift. So you meet people who are like really in touch with that. It can be a little overwhelming. It's like, wow, you meant so much to me when I was growing up. This is really something. But I'd say as time goes on, you figure out how to keep control over it and not make people uneasy.
Now, to those people who don't know you quite that well, do a little promotion. Tell us about websites, social media, and stuff like that.
All
Where
right.
people can find you, where can they get your music, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thanks for asking. The most reliable way to get hold of my music online is at store.keneally.com. That's the online Keneally store. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you can figure out how to spell my name. But yeah, store.keneally.com, and the new album is available there. My stuff is streaming in most of the places that you would expect to find it streaming. The new album will be on Bandcamp very soon. We're starting to build a catalog of my stuff at Bandcamp, including some very nice rare material that isn't streaming anywhere else. So that's a good place to check out. You can always go to Keneally.com to find out what's up with me. I'm on the usual social networks. I'm very accessible there. And I have a Patreon account, which I'm very excited about. I'm always uploading unreleased audio and video and weird drawings and scans of music manuscripts and anything that I think people might find interesting. I'm posting there, and the best way I can describe it is that it's a box set that just keeps getting added to. It's a never-ending box set. So that's at patreon.com/Mike
Well,
Keneally.
I have to say, you are really such a generous person. I mean, when it comes to musicians, really the most generous people I've seen online, that's you and that's Pete Townsend. When he had his old website, he would put out a lot of stuff for people to listen, to download and stuff. Of course, it was much more difficult then than it is now. So
Right.
thank you very much for that as well.
Well, you're welcome.
So we have this now. You already talked about new music. Any plans when you will be releasing new music at all?
I have to find the time to complete the stuff that I have in process now. I have while I was working on the new album, I was also working on a great deal of other music for what looks like is going to be a primarily instrumental disc, and much longer. It might be the type of album where I'll have to struggle to fit it onto an 80-minute CD. And it's I don't know. I'm not going to make any predictions as to when I'm going to say that that's done. I have all the sessions with me on the road now. I always have the best of intentions. Like, while I'm out on the road, I can do work on this stuff. It's not always easy to do so. Having said that, I've got a night off tonight in the hotel here in Tilburg, and no other plans to go anywhere. So maybe I'll get some work done on the next album here tonight.
Oh, that would be nice. Oh, by the way, you already mentioned where people can get your stuff. Isn't your stuff going to be on Burning Shed for all European customers as well?
It is. I mean, there's been a Mike Keneally page on Burning Shed for a long time with catalog items, but the new album is on its way to being shipped. Well, actually, I think I saw a notification that they received their shipment. So Burning Shed has my new album available for sale, as well as a number of the older titles too.
Yeah, so
So
let's not forget let's
yeah.
not forget Burning Shed, because it's such a great company run by Tim Bonus, and
Yes,
he's just such a musician, of course.
and a musician. Yeah, I'm grateful that there's an artist led online store for us to work with, because Tim understands where we're coming from, and that's a blessing for us. So yes, and of course the postage to order things from the United States is almost incomprehensible. So I'm grateful that the stuff is available at Burning Shed now.
Yeah, and I can actually add some more knowledge to those people that don't know that yet. Burning Shed have done this thing where you basically pay all expenses ahead of time, so you don't pay anything on the door. So you don't get the thing and the postman says, "Oh, here's I still need 20 euros or something." You pay all these expenses ahead of time, so you just get the privilege of getting your CD or your record delivered at no extra charge on the bloody door.
Yes, that's the way it should be.
So you are currently on tour with Devin Townsend, and also with French band Clone and band Fixation in some places. How's it going?
We've done, I think, 7 shows so far. It seems to be getting better every night. It's a very, very good band. It's just a 4-piece band of Devin and myself, James Leach on bass, Darby Todd on drums, and we all played together for the first time just 2 weeks ago. We had 3 days of rehearsal, and it all just came together so quickly. And every night it just gets sharper and tighter and more powerful and more fun. And we're having so much fun. We're really, really enjoying it. And so far, Clone have not joined the tour yet, so we've just been doing shows with Fixation, and they're fantastic. A beautiful way to get the night kicked off. There's so much energy. They're like half our age, so they come out with a lot of energy, and it's a good thing for us to try to keep up with when we get out there. But I'm loving the shows. It's a really good selection of music from Devin's career, and people seem to really be enjoying it. So it's good.
2 very last questions, very quickly. Any desert island discs that would come to mind right now at this very moment?
The Miles Davis, the complete live at Plugged Nickel, 1965. Barring that, any recordings from the Plugged Nickel, 1965. The Pet Sounds Sessions box by the Beach Boys. OK Computer and Kid A by Radiohead. We're Only in It for the Money by the Mothers. A Wizard, a True Star by Todd Rundgren, and Rubber Soul by the Beatles. And forgive me, but I have to say the US edition. To me, I think that album should start with I've Just Seen a Face.
Okay. And there's one more thing. Sometimes a song gets in your head, or a melody, and you don't know what it is at that point. You don't know how it got there, but it just won't go away. Is there anything that's been in your head lately that's been driving you nuts?
There probably was, but for some reason, as soon as you asked that question, I heard the song Maxine by Donald Fagen in my head, and then I couldn't hear anything else. So I feel like there might have been some weird little advertising jingle that was stuck in my head, but Donald Fagen just knocked it right out of there. So I'm going to say Maxine.
Wow, unbelievable. A lot of people say, I don't really know, but you spot on as usual. Mike, thank you so very much for being so kind yet again to grant us an extensive interview.
My pleasure.
It's wonderful to have this new record, The Thing That Knowledge Can't Eat. I hope you get truckloads of money for it.
Thank you.
And
I
don't get
that.
jaded enough to not give us more music in the coming years. And I hope we can do this again somewhere down the line.
Anytime, Carsten.
Mike, thank you so very much. Have a great one. I'll talk to you later.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.